I would get over the thing that you've never worked with data before. I promise you, you actually have. You've just never realized it. If you've been in HR more than 2 weeks, I promise you've worked with some form of data, whether that was observing something in a meeting, having to go and gather evidence of what we've done before about a particular topic.
You're listening to HR Superstars, a podcast brought to you by 15Five. On this show, we talk to strategic people leaders who are making a meaningful impact in their organizations and shaping the future of work. So get ready to be inspired and discover the secrets behind building high-performing teams and fostering a culture of growth and thriving. The future of HR starts here. Data comes up in almost every conversation I have with HR leaders, usually with a mix of curiosity and hesitation. And we all know data should guide our decisions, and we've all heard that we need to be more data-driven. But for many of us in this field, especially those without an analytics background, it still feels intimidating, and at worst, totally out of reach. But the truth is that data confidence doesn't require a degree in statistics or math or analytics. It requires something all of us as HR leaders already excel at: curiosity, pattern spotting, meaningful question asking. Data isn't about perfection or proving that you're technical, but really using information to make smarter choices for your people and for your business. And this moment really matters as AI becomes much more woven into every tool that we use, the workflows that we're building, every LinkedIn post and conversation that we're having. The quality of our people data and our ability to interpret it really becomes a differentiator for us as HR leaders. And leaders who build comfort with data now are going to be the ones who are shaping the future of the HR function, not the ones reacting to it. And that's why I'm so excited to have Dr. Dieter Veldsman here with us today. He's the Chief HR Scientist at AIHR, who brings not just expertise, but a really deeply practical approach to helping HR teams become truly more data fluent. And my hope for you all today is that you're going to walk away from this conversation with clarity, confidence, and a much more grounded sense of what using data in HR actually looks like. Welcome. So happy to have you. Tell me, what I always like to ask is, give me the movie trailer version of you and why you do what you do.
I am somebody that is passionate about human behavior, how human behavior plays out in organizations, and how you help organizations create environments for people to thrive. I love the science that underpins human behavior, but also the practicality thereof. And in my role as Chief HR Scientist at AIHR, I have the privilege and the opportunity to think about how can we make the science of HR practical and better for the future.
I absolutely love that. Is this a field you were always in?
So I kind of moved around quite a bit, but I come out of the HR domain. So I used to be a chief people officer before this, and I always had a bit of a academic career on the side, doing a lot of research into organizational psychology and HR. And this was the opportunity to kind of bring those two things together.
Dieter, I'm curious for you, why do you think so many leaders feel intimidated by data?
If we take a step back, Karina, I think we need to acknowledge first that a lot of people that enter the HR domain, and what our research tells us, almost 92% of people that enter into HR actually don't come from an HR background. So we typically come from education, we come from social services, administrative services, etc. And they are all careers where you don't get a lot of exposure to data-driven techniques very early on. So I think there's a natural tendency on the one side that people did not necessarily have the exposure to working with data from the get-go. And then on the other side, I think there are other things that they motivate people. And I think that traditional saying, that you're a data person or you're not, I think that has changed very much in the world that we are today. I think everybody is involved in how data drives decisions and how we use digital and technology in order to get stuff done. But I think there is still this misconception that you also mentioned in the intro, that being a data person means I love the spreadsheet side of things and the dashboards and sitting and diving deeper and deeper and deeper. I think you can be a person passionate about data and how to use data and how to utilize data to drive business decision-making in HR without having to be the person that does the number crunching on the spreadsheets and gets your kick out of that. I think it's also the definition of what is a data person is changing.
When I hear the words data person, I think of my statistics class in college. Like, that's just what I think of, is like having to create models and like figure all of this out. How would you define what a data HR leader is?
For me, it's somebody that looks at how do we validate our assumptions and ask better questions and try to find evidence to help us make better decisions. So let me just unpack that for a moment. I think also when we think about data, we immediately think about quantitative numbers. data is actually quantitative and qualitative, right? So I think something that we are really good at as HR professionals is collecting data from various different sources. So I think we need to remove the stigma around the data equals the spreadsheet, as I've mentioned. And we must rather say it's for me a lot more about knowing what the right questions are, gathering evidence through data that helps me answer that particular question, and then validating what that assumption is and making a call. Because eventually it's about what do you do with it and what's the movement. And for me, that's a lot more of a mindset of being data focused and data oriented and data led, as opposed to necessarily the skill of working with data, making you a data person.
Yeah, I love that shift in just using the language of being data led. And I think that would resonate with a lot of people because there are a lot of ways that we gather data all the time within the HR function. We probably don't even realize, to your point, even through conversations, through feedback that we're getting, through observation across different meetings, but it's not always obvious to HR leaders that that is a data point. It's like, well, I need a very specific number. And it's kind of bringing those two things together as you're describing. But even taking a step further back, why would you say this is important and really important for HR leaders now to think about how they want to be data led or data informed in their work that they do?
Yeah, for me, there's a couple of reasons, right? I think on the one side, the world has become a lot more complex. So I think the types of decisions that HR leaders need to make today, you actually need multiple sources of data and information that helps you make the best possible decision, because a lot of things are new. A lot of things are also very interdependent upon each other. So a decision I make here is definitely going to have a downstream impact and implication. I think secondly, we can all agree, and you'll see I have no hair, so I've been in the HR field for quite a while, that what we do today in HR and the mandate that we carry in organizations is very different than what it was 10, 15, 20, 25 years ago or longer. So I think that expectation about how the science of HR has developed and what underpins it has led us towards the fact that there is a need for more data-driven and evidence-based practices that we can bring into the boardroom and into the discussions that we drive. And I think the last point is, we've been talking about HR's credibility and our strategic influence in, the upper echelons of the organization. But to be able to do that similar to other functions like marketing, IT, finance, etc., we then need to have the ability to actually connect what's happening in the real world through data to what the business questions are and the decisions that we want to drive. So I don't necessarily think it's a new thing. I think it's more important now because we've realized the value that we can get in terms of achieving the objectives that we want to as HR by utilizing data in a very, very different way. And it's much more accessible than what it was, a couple of years ago. Finding and consolidating and gathering data was usually the task that you spent most of your time on, whereas today with some of the newer technology, it is much more about the interpretation, how I use the insights, how do I tell the story.
Yeah.
And I actually think that transition has made HR professionals very suitable to utilize data to achieve our goals. We are great at storytelling. We are great, as you mentioned, at spotting patterns. We are great at connecting the dots. And those are things that I think today we have the data to support that and actually make those cases for people around why we think we're making the right decisions or what the downside of not making a decision is.
That's such a great connection to lean into what those natural skills are already within the HR function and just having it be complemented by data, right? Because so often I hear from other HR leaders, like they're going to the table with their executives or with the board, and they're like, I feel this thing very passionately, but I know someone's going to ask me for the number and I don't know how to do it. And it's like, well, okay, but now like data, to your point, is at your fingertips. I mean, you could either through different tools that you have that can connect that data autonomously without you having to run a full cycle or go and ask ChatGPT for resources. Being able to back up your point is so great. And even to have that a little bit of a point of conflict, like that's one of the things I love to use AI most for is like, why would this perspective be wrong? Or like, what's someone going to find in this argument? How do I prepare for that already? What do you see as the biggest risk of not doing this for leaders who aren't ready, are still feeling a little bit fearful, aren't kind of dipping their toes in the water of being data led? What are they leaving on the table and what are they risking for themselves and their businesses?
So I think there's definitely a component there of credibility. So what I mean by credibility is I think that will become the baseline expectation for people going forward, the same way that today we talk about, you need to utilize certain tool sets to work in a particular way. So I think data will just become part and parcel of how we work, regardless of what role you are in. I think the second part there that you also really risk there is when I say relevance, I mean it in the sense of, do you actually really know whether you are making the right decision or not? And on the other side, what types of insights can you bring into the room? I think that's the biggest opportunity I see through the utilization of data and AI, etc., in the HR domain is we can fundamentally change the type of conversation we want to bring into the boardroom and then actually have similar to other functions. I think the trends that support it, the indicators that tell us whether these are real things or not. So I think risking not going that route, I really think we actually risk focusing on the wrong things as HR or not being able to showcase our value or proving, and I know ROI is always a tricky conversation, but actually having that conversation to say, this is what we thought would happen. Process has now happened. This is what the data tells us around what has moved, what hasn't moved. What do we want to do about that? It's a very different conversation than always trying to prove your existence, your value, etc. If you are actually just making data part of that process and informing your next steps.
Exactly. Well, and I think at times I've seen other HR leaders and even myself at moments in my career be fearful of what the data is going to say, right? If I made a hypothesis and I went out and I tried this experiment, but now I'm going to come back and the data is showing I was wrong, does that actually ruin my credibility and relevance? It's like almost kind of turning the fear back on itself, which is, I always find I've never actually seen happen in real life. Because the exact same thing we want from other execs, we should hold ourselves to that same standard, which is we made an informed decision with the best information we have. And I can imagine there's other people on here too who are in small, lean HR teams where you have to keep moving and make a call with what you've got, the best data that you have at hand, and to come back and say, this is what did work and this is actually what didn't. And now we know why. Because some things you'll never know until it's in practice. But I'm curious for have you ever found that that's hurt an HR leader to be able to say that data proved them wrong?
It's a very interesting point you make, because I think we grow up in the HR world where you almost this idea that we need to perfect things ourselves and then we take it to the organization because we only have one chance of getting it right, whether that is to get the resources, the opportunity, whatever you want to call it. Whereas I think it does allow us, and we first need a bit of a mindset shift, because to your point, data showcasing that our original hypothesis or assumptions were incorrect is not bad data or failure, it's progress. It tells us that we've found out a way that this is not working, so let's try something different. I think it does come a little bit there with you have to do that in a particular context where you've built the trust and the relationships to be able to have that type of conversation. Personally, I've never seen that data is the reason that if something is proven wrong, that somebody loses credibility. I actually think it's the inverse. I think you gain it because you can go to an executive team and say, what we've always thought about ABC of what happens in our organization is actually not the case. There's something else that causes this, and this is why we're going to pivot to be able to get there in that type of way. So it has to happen in context. And, we did some research. What was interesting is that you're only effective if you have the trust capital, which we are really good at building as HR professionals, to actually land a lot of these conversations, because then they become valuable because you're doing it as a collaborative partner as opposed to trying to bring data to prove your point and prove why you are right. I don't think that's the purpose necessarily. And that's where people mistake it. And that's where HR professionals run into this challenge of, the quality of my data is not good enough, I'm never going to bring it. Then you're never going to have the right conversation. Rather come in there and say, love your point with what I know now, at this particular point in time with the data that is available, this is the best course of action that we can take. That might be different, and then we adapt and we adjust to it. But at least for now, this is the best call that we can make. And I think that's slightly different if you have that type of mindset.
Yeah, well, and I love that phrasing, trust capital, building that trust capital, because what I hear when you talk about that too is the differentiation of going with ego or no ego, right? If you're going in to just say, I am right, this is about me only, you're never going to build the trust and actually land your point no matter what you have. But if it's really about collaboration, Dieter, you and I have the same goal. To your point, I get it. We're both totally aligned, but here is what I'm seeing and understanding with the data. Here's how it correlates to what's happening in the organization. This is where I think we're going to have the biggest impact. That's so different because now it's you and I solving the problem together, not my idea versus your idea, which can be such a huge point of friction when it comes to HR leaders trying to get that credibility and buy-in for whatever their initiative is that they're taking to the organization.
Yeah, I love your point around it. It does remove the ego a little bit, right? Because you can then almost discuss what is on the table as opposed to the things that are not being said. To your point, though, I think to do that, you have to see data as something that you utilize throughout and as part of the process. We've fallen into the trap as HR professionals. We gather the data for analysis to make the decision. We don't speak to anybody again about that at all until we want to prove the outcome again. And then people are like, but you presented this 7 months ago and it looked very different. What's happened? as opposed to actually using it as something that fuels the continuous conversation and brings people along, as opposed to it guides me at a point in time and then it proves that I was right all along. That's not what it is there. It needs to be something that you use to steer all of the time and continuously. Then I think it's very different.
So what would that look like in practice? Let's say like we have an HR leader who's working around employee engagement. What would it look like, or what would you recommend to use data continuously to steer that process?
Yeah, so I think the first point, of course, also to be careful not to drown in data because there is just so much available. I think that's the first word of caution I would just say around the fact that dashboards don't change the world. It's what you actually do with them that matters. So I think the first protocol is to say, what is the question that I want to ask about engagement? What is it that I want to know about my organization? Then go back and actually test those hypotheses against the data that you continuously have and inform that, and then that inform your engagement strategy. But once you put those things down in the spirit of continuous feedback, then say, but what are the data points that I will continuously monitor that tells me whether things are moving along or not? And what data tells me in the short term whether there's progress versus the ones that in the long term starts to tell me whether there's actually been movements in the behaviors that I want to drive, etc. But simplify that. I'm a firm believer that if you can't tell the story with 3 metrics, then it's probably the wrong story that you're trying to tell. So try to get to that point that you whittle it down to what the core is and you roll it up to what actually helps you gain the insight as opposed to just measuring things for measurement's sake.
I absolutely love that. If you can't tell it in 3 points, you might be telling the wrong story. That is an incredible, one of those like good juicy takeaways. It's so easy to lean on because you're right. It's sometimes I think, especially when it comes to really complex surveys or processes that HR tends to run, you have like 100 data points in front of you. And that's often I see the barrier of, oh my gosh, like what matters? How do I even know what to look at or what should I be correlating? What's the advice that you give to HR teams about even just how to take a large set of data and distill it down to those 3 things that really matter?
I would take a bit of an outside-in approach. And what I mean by that is the mistake we make is we try to look at HR data through an HR lens. And what that means is we typically go look at all the hundreds and thousands of data points that we have, because you are absolutely right. HR will be one of the functions that actually has the most data points of a population internally, at least. And then we start looking at that and say, but what is interesting for us to know? I think look at it from the outside in terms of what is it that's going to help me achieve what I want the business to know? What insight do I need to gather out of the data that helps me answer the business questions that I have? Is the business question at the moment around, we are struggling because we don't know where the right skills are in our organization? Then use that lens to go and look at what data is available that answers the question. I would never start with the perspective just of, I have all this data, what do I want to tell people? Because I think that gets you into trouble. I would almost say, and I know this sounds counterintuitive, and please don't quote this out of context, but ignore the data, first ask the question and say, these 3 things matter to me. Based upon that, let me then go and look at all the data that I have and how does that actually align to the questions that I then have, and are they impactful in terms of what I'm trying to ask? So what I try to promote a little bit more is know why you want to look at data. Don't just look at it for data's sake. Otherwise, then we do drown in it.
I've been at companies where we had 36-page Google Docs of every engagement insight and lens you could look at. And what did we do with it? Nothing. Literally nothing. There was no insight in there that helped us, to your point, answer an important business question, direct an action so we could get to the right outcome. It was just data for data's sake. And it was hours and hours and hours of people work, and then nothing would change. And that, when we think about those kinds of activities and how then the organization builds or doesn't build trust with HR, it is such a way to ruin our credibility by saying, like, we just spend our time doing activity, but not taking action.
Yeah, and if it's helpful, something that I kind of advise a lot of people to do is, to look at it through the lens of, and I call it CPCC. So that just means always think about context. So in what context am I showing you this data point? So what business decision am I trying to influence? What's the purpose of our conversation? What's the content? Let me then show you what I have. And then what's the call to action? Those are the 4 things that you bring to the table. Because to your point, we think by showcasing the work that we've done up to now buys us the credibility and the pat on the back to say, my HR team, they really know what they're talking about. Look at all the advanced analysis that they did. It doesn't really work that way. People look at it and they're like, oh, this is presentation number 72 or dashboard number 105 that I'm looking at today. Why is this different? If you can kind of to those different aspects, I think it changes the conversation completely.
Okay, so tell us the CPCC one more time. Context,
purpose, content, call to action.
Content and call to action. That is awesome. That's going to become like the new acronym for us heading into 2026. I think it is such a good way to just take something that can feel really overwhelming and put it into the right conversation. And I think what I love about this is it taps back into those skills that HR leaders and teams already have. Like we know how, to your point, to see the insight, to put the story together, to make it feel relevant. It's just remembering that that's really the ultimate goal of what we're trying to do here and what really the business is asking for leaders. Dieter, what would you say to someone who's here today, who's starting from a place of zero? I'm not using data. I don't have the confidence yet. What's the first move you would recommend that they make to just make progress or becoming more data-led?
So I think that the first one might sound a little bit strange, but I would first get kind of over the thing around the fact that you've never worked with data before. I promise you actually have. You've just never realized it. If you've been in HR more than 2 weeks, I promise you've worked with some form of data, whether that was observing something in a meeting, having to go and gather, evidence of what we've done before about a particular topic. So think about that in a way that just to get over that first initial hump and build some confidence that you might actually know what you are talking about, but you just never labeled it yet in terms of working with data. The second point then is a little bit more practical, right? In the sense of go and understand what data is available in your organization and try to connect that to the work that you already do. What I mean by that is don't go out and try and search for these massive, kind of what is out there. Start very small with what is one thing that you think data can help you answer, and go and look at what data do I have available and just do that one thing. Refine that insight a little bit more and go and tell that story to somebody else and get their feedback. And then from there, you start building it out a little bit more. So it's just to spark that curiosity from the get-go. Second point I want to make there, don't start with the massively complex, longitudinal things I want to look at and what statistical relationships and significance look like. Start with something really, really simple that just helps you get that conversation going, a little bit more. So in essence, what I'm saying is, just start because you probably already have. On the other side, then just get going so that you can build the confidence over time, and then don't be too complex and try to solve the whole world's problems in your very first data project. Just solve something small that you've been struggling with, that you know really, really well, and start aligning data with that.
HR has changed from support function to strategic powerhouse, but traditional HR software hasn't caught up. 15Five's performance management platform helps your HR team discover where to take action and make a business impact. Find out how to maximize employee performance, engagement, and retention at 15five.com or click the link in the show notes.
I guarantee you there's a leader who would love to tell you, this is the big question we're trying to solve this quarter, is how can we increase our revenue by this amount? We need to expand and be able to have a new market share. And then just ask more questions like, okay, well, what would the connection to the HR team be? What would connection to the people function be? Oh, well, it's hard for us to increase revenue because our sales team has 40% turnover in the last year. I wonder why. I wonder why we have that turnover. Now you've got a question. Now you can go look at your data and say, figure out what would the answer to that be and what a relevant action would be. There's always a connection if you just keep asking more questions. But I'm sure you find this too, Dieter. If anything you hear stops you, whether it's from intimidation or just lack of knowledge, or I don't know where to go, that's just the easiest way to make zero progress instead of just one more question.
Love that, right? And I think definitely that curiosity you need to have to start connecting the dots and asking those why questions. I think the other one that sometimes if you're a little bit shy to go to the business and ask that question, ask yourself, who are the employees in our organization? Just start there, but then go and try to showcase what the data actually tells you about the profile, the tenure, how long people have been here. What tendency do you have in terms of what the profile looks like in your organization that will already start opening up your insights a lot more beyond like the demographic HRIS type of data that we normally sit with? That should be something that you already have oversight in, and then, kind of work your way outwards as well. If you don't want to do the, let me chat to the business, I would recommend you rather do the business one that you've mentioned. I think that's way more valuable in the longer term. But if you want a bit of a trial run, maybe try this one.
Yeah, exactly. Or, if you don't want to go talk to your executive, find someone who reports to them, find one person you're comfortable with, or one way that you can just start to build that. But I do always find it so interesting. And I've certainly been in that position where There's been executives I've worked with that intimidate me for one reason or another. We're different personalities, different strengths, but never once I start asking them about themselves or their function have they said, I don't want to tell you. I'm not interested. People love to talk about themselves and their experience. Like sometimes leaning into that part of ego is okay for your own benefit, like to create that conversation. I think people would be surprised at what they did.
Yeah, I always ask the question, when meeting with execs, what keeps you awake at night, just as an opener. And that usually leads to, to your point, like a very long period of conversation there. Or I ask them, what should I have asked you that I didn't? And that usually then flips around what their priorities also are. But agree, this is like a qualitative interview is also data, right? It's not just about the spreadsheet that I've mentioned before. So this is a way of gathering data, getting insight. Go think about what is the themes that I heard from this particular individual. How does that connect to the work that I am doing? Where can I go and actually triangulate and see if there's another point of view that actually agrees or disagrees with that? How can I bring that alignment and that insight? So I think that's such a good place to start.
Can you maybe talk us through a story where you've helped an HR team, or even in your experience, really bring their point or an initiative to life through data, like how that's really come together?
Yeah, I'll talk about a retail organization. And I mean, this was quite far along their data journey. So just to put that into context a little bit, but what they did really well was they managed to link a lot of their internal culture metrics to sales metrics in their organization. So being in retail, fast-paced, I make long-term in retail is like 3 weeks for them, for this organization. I'm teasing, but it's kind of a very fast-moving environment. They had a metric that they had developed over time related to leadership quality, and it kind of measured through a survey people's trust in leadership, their confidence that leadership is doing the right thing in the organization, or making the right decisions, etc. And they managed to over time showcase what the relationship is between that and sales numbers going down in a couple of months. So practically what they were starting to see, and they reported on that monthly at the Exco team, if the trust and the quality in leadership tended to go down, your sales numbers would go down 5 to 7 months later in the organization. So they actually started utilizing that as a risk metric to proactively talk about, okay, something is happening. Why are our people no longer trusting that we are on the right path? And they utilize that as a leadership quality data metric. Because it was data driven over time, it took that ego out of the conversation, because it was about the perception and confidence that people had in the leadership team, which was, perception is truth sometimes with these types of different elements. And then they started to validate that a little bit more. Maybe a second quick anecdote, another organization, and this one is a simpler one to do, started identifying by just looking at practical, when do people turn over in their organization, and comparing that with things like tenure data in the organization and age. They started to see that there was a very interesting trend that they tended to lose all their managers after 3 to 5 years. And when they deep dived into that a little bit more, they started realizing it's for all the career things that we intuitively know but never pay attention to. I've kind of done what I wanted to in the role. I'm expecting something else that I need to be able to do there. Based upon that, they then pitched a leadership program that kind of did an intervention just before people got into that high risk period of 3 to 5. And then they implemented a career program that kind of pushed people through that middle retention piece that they needed to. And then people tended to stay a lot longer in having a lot more manager credibility and consistency. 2 data examples that you won't know are data examples, because they actually tried to solve a real business problem that they had identified.
I absolutely love both of those. And what I really loved about your first example is this perception is reality. I think sometimes we can, as HR leaders, get caught up in trying to look for things that are so fact reality based, right? That it's like, well, this is the firm number and the firm thing. But sometimes what the data is telling us is that people are having an experience that is or is not always backed by data, but there's a collective experience happening we have to take action on, which is so interesting about that perception and company confidence is, even if it's not like the company is actually doing poorly, if you can show through data that the perception of something is having a significant impact, and I'm sure people can resonate with that here. Have you ever had someone in your organization have a perception of a leader that was really negative or really positive? And what did that do for them? How did that impact how their team behaved, how they worked together? Those kind of things are really interesting data stories that I've even worked with leaders on. I've got to coach you through this, because even though you don't feel it, other people do. And now this is actually really going to change your engagement.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's also, I try to think about data in those instances as signals, right? So it's not one definitive data point that proves it to you. It's kind of various data points that collectively start showcasing something is moving in a particular trend that we either, or direction that we either like or that we don't like. And then
Yeah.
I think if you can surface that and bring that to the table, it gets back to our earlier point around data needs to be used throughout the process and not just to prove the facts and the points along the way. And something that might sound a little counterintuitive, from my side, is also the reality that you are also a data point as the HR professional. Your observations, your experience that you bring to the table, the things that you have seen before, that is also a very valuable data point to bring to the table, not to be used in isolation. So go triangulate that to make sure that you're not kind of leaning into your own bias and into your own blind spots. But it is a very, very valuable type of component to take into consideration. People sometimes forget the knowledge that they bring into the room. And then we typically get into the situation where we don't know why the data tells us that, but the data tells us that. So let's just make that decision. No, query it. Say, I've seen something like this before, and it actually was as a result of the following types of reasons. Can we go a little bit deeper to understand that slightly better? I think that's responsible use if you're able to do it that way.
Oh, completely. We have this habit that we've started actually doing more recently at 15.5, which is where even as executives, when we come to each other with a perspective, we actually disclose like, hey, this is just my opinion, or I've gone out and I've done the research. Like this is actually a determination I'm making based on data and fact and experience. And it helps to just, even to your point, like put the context of the conversation. Like I'm coming to you with an opinion. I have a signal, but I don't know exactly what's going on. I need help figuring that out. Or I actually have found something. Now I have a recommended action, and this is why it's important to take. And even just doing something like that in a conversation with either your teams or your peer leaders goes back to that trust and that credibility you're building. Is I'm not just coming saying anything out of the gate and making us focus on the wrong things. I'm actually letting you know very clearly where I need to help and need help investigating, or where am I ready to take action.
And I think it also helps you get over that, and it was just my experience going into executive rooms. We sometimes go with the perception that we think we need to bring the answers and then get validation of the answers that we've brought. It's sometimes better to come in and say, I see these signals through the data. I think it's telling us this, but my opinion tells us that I think there's something that's amiss here. Let's make sense of that collectively together. Because I think that's a very different type of conversation. I get it. It cuts back to the trust capital point that we made slightly earlier. You need high levels of trust to be able to do that. But I think that's a really good thing to do. We also have a similar practice where you'll say, this is my view, or this is our joint view as a team. So in my team, I have a whole bunch of people that are much more passionate about data than I am, and they go much deeper than I do. Is this what all of us think, or is it what just my perception of that is? Or is it actually something that we've discussed and done the research on? Because it does point towards things that I think has a different weight and a different connotation to what you want to achieve through it.
Oh, yeah, exactly. There was an interesting question around helping leaders understand how to ask good questions. What do you think of when you see that, and maybe what some of the struggle might be that this person's experiencing?
So if the question is, how do you help business know which questions to ask of HR? I think it's very much around helping them understand that they're not asking a question of HR, they're asking a business question that HR has a perspective on. And what do I mean by that, right? So if the typical HR question would be, what does turnover look like today? That's the wrong question. The question should rather be to say, as a business, I don't think we've got access to the right skill sets. Why are we not retaining them? Because that immediately phrases it in a slightly different way. So I think try to put yourself in the shoes of the person asking the question, and then slowly guide them and educate them over time to kind of get them there, but get into that conversation. There's no such thing as a bad question. Some of them you will look at and say, I can't believe we're answering this again. It's an opportunity to shift it slowly. You're not going to shift that culture immediately. So bit by bit, over time.
Yeah, I think that's a really great recommendation. And oftentimes I find when leaders come to me with questions that, to me, like I have my own reaction to, of like, oh my gosh, why are we doing this again? Or that question makes no sense. Is I just say more. Tell me more. Why does that question matter to you? And giving them, again, that space to talk, you will actually start to figure out what's really at the heart of it. And then you can say, oh, well, I see that you came to me with this question, but what I'm hearing you describe is that you're really curious about this other thing. And that would be really valuable for us to dig deeper on together. I think sometimes there is that coaching aspect of what we do in HR, right? Even with other leaders, like they are sometimes just as intimidated to ask us the questions as we are of them. And so being a model of curiosity and empathy, I think helps us get to what really matters between the two.
Yeah. I have a colleague and I quote him on this often. He always says, what's the question behind your question? Because you're immediately getting to the point where somebody's already made sense of what they should ask you versus the reason why they came to you. So he always does this thing to say, but what's the question behind your question? the moment somebody has to explain why they got to the question they ask you, they immediately step back into their own world.
That's a powerful way to shift the conversation. And what do you do for, people who don't have access to dashboarding tools or large sets of data? What's the best way for them to get, I guess, like benchmarking data or information about what's happening in the market and what other companies doing? What resources do you generally point people to?
So I think there's a lot of really good publicly available things as well that's very, very useful. So there's a couple of like labor market organizations that I think is good to follow that do really credible research around how labor markets, for example, are changing, and their insights are pretty actionable and you can use them quite easily. I think on the other side, it's much less about the tools that you have. I think that you can, with very basic tools that most people have got access to, you can get pretty far. Don't think it's about the Power BI tool or dashboard or whatever else. It's actually a lot more just about what data structures do you have in place and how do you visualize and make sense of those, and that you can do with very, very basic things that you already have available. So I would say try this combination of saying, what do I have internally and how do I optimize that, versus how can I at least compare that to some of the things that we find out there, and then start with the things that are most important to you. Don't try to find, absolutely everything. If, turnover is the thing that your business is really worried about, just go look for that from a credible source. So always ask people, where does their data come from? How frequently do they update it? And can you actually find similar types of insights from other sources, just to make sure that you can actually tick the box there. If you're using AI tools, which is typically what most people do today, go validate. That's the only thing. Remember, AI interprets it across the board and gives you a conclusion. Go and validate the actual source. That's quite an important thing to get right.
Such an important call out. Don't take anything AI shares you at face value. Just do a little bit of digging. It can be an incredible partner, but isn't the sole and single source. Dieter, we're coming down to our final 2 minutes. This has been such a powerful and impactful conversation. I'll say, when I think about everything that you shared today, the one thing that really stands out to me is that every person, every HR leader, team member is already working with data. Like, you are already a data-led person. You just need to lean more into those skills, but you're having it and you're using it every day. And I think it's that simple mindset shift that actually isn't the barrier you need to jump here. It's just taking steps every day to get a little bit better, to ask a little bit better questions, try to figure out how to connect your data to the questions that the business is asking, the actions that are really going to move it forward. And don't forget the skills that you bring to the table, right? There's a lot of this that is really about, to what you said early on, about just that confidence within yourself and really understanding that you have the competence and you can do it. And sometimes I think removing ourselves out of the way is the most helpful thing that we can do. So I so value your time and your expertise. Will you tell everyone, how can they find you and connect with you if they want to learn more and know more about what AI and HR is doing?
Thank you very much, Karina. I loved the conversation. It was lovely to be able to join you. Please reach out on LinkedIn. Always happy to continue the conversation there. And we also share quite a lot of the work that we are doing about what we see happening in HR there as well. So we're very happy to connect there.
Engaged employees are your most valuable asset. They're innovative, loyal, and committed to achieving exceptional results. By fostering a culture of engagement, you'll unleash their full potential and create a competitive advantage that sets your organization apart. But how do you do it? Check out 15Five's Employee Engagement Playbook linked in the show notes. It explores the undeniable benefits of employee engagement and dives deep into how to measure it. I promise you'll learn actionable strategies to transform engagement insights into measurable outcomes.